Good morning, everyone. Can you all see where it says, can you see share your breastfeeding story? Yes. Okay. Welcome. Today we are going to share some breastfeeding stories and hear from some presenters and from some other community members. I just wanted to welcome you all. This is National Breastfeeding Month, August 23rd. One of the few days in the month of August that are just in general the celebration of National Breastfeeding Month. Together we can, and hopefully we are doing it together. I want to take a few minutes to just acknowledge that I'm presenting today from Durham, North Carolina on Lumbee and Spumoni land. And I think it's really part of the celebration of National Breastfeeding Month is thinking about our racial and cultural heritage that has led to our breastfeeding journey and our experience. And then I think that what I want to do next is just switch over and let Stephanie share if you're ready. Stephanie, do you think you're ready to share your screen, or should I share your slides? Oh, you're muted. You're still muted. Stephanie, you're still muted.
I'm sorry. I said you can share the slides because it's kind of freezing my screen when I try to open it up.
Okay. There we go. There we go.
Okay, so my breastfeeding story is complicated, but not in many ways. And it really played a really large part in my life. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about where it all began, which is when I was a little girl. So as a little girl, and I'm not going to read exactly as the slides say, but if anybody wants to read it from the slides, you absolutely can. I always knew that I was going to breastfeed my children. I would breastfeed my baby dolls as a little girl. And I remember one time that I was playing house in my bedroom and I was breastfeeding my baby doll. My mom came in and I immediately stopped and hid what I was doing. And I had this sense of shame that what I was doing was wrong or grown, even though it felt right. It felt like I was just playing mom and this is what moms do. And my mom didn't catch on to what I was doing. I told her later when I grew up. But I think a lot of it had to do with my upbringing in a more religious household and not wanting to be perceived as grown, which a lot of Black girls tend to get that label if they do anything that could be interpreted in any other type of way. And so I did continue to nurse my baby dolls, but I just did it in hiding, and I, would make sure that my mom didn't see. And so I always tell people that I knew that I was going to breastfeed, even though I had never seen people breastfeed. I had one aunt who breastfed, and she was kind of ridiculed because she practiced extended breastfeeding. And so it was kind of the joke in the family because her daughter was a little older and she could come and get on her lap and say she wanted to breastfeed. And so outside of that, I never heard people talk about breastfeeding and I never saw people breastfeeding. It just was something that somehow I knew about and it just resonated with me that that's what I wanted to do. And so we can go to the next slide. So at 22, I became pregnant and this was my first pregnancy, my first child. And I had a really turbulent pregnancy. I had lots of issues going on personally with the father of my child, and I also had really, really, really bad sickness for about 7 months, and of course, some other pregnancy-related ailments. But it was a tough time, and throughout that time, I don't think I ever questioned whether I would breastfeed or whether I could breastfeed. It just was something that I was going to do. I didn't even have this negative concept in my brain that there could be something that I couldn't do. And again, this was not something that I had any type of support with, or someone telling me about it or things to do. So after giving birth, which I had to have an emergency C-section, I finally got to hold my son, and it just felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I'm supposed to be breastfeeding. And I didn't have any clue as to whether I was doing it wrong, whether I was doing it right. I just did what felt natural. And so I had a nurse on duty who was really, really supportive of me breastfeeding. When I told her that's what I wanted to do, she was cheering me on. She just kind of gave me some different ways to hold the baby. And it felt nice because she was the only person, even moving after giving birth, who helped me with breastfeeding, or who really gave me a positive interaction about choosing to breastfeed. And there was an incident in the hospital where she kind of became my hero. I had an extended stay because I had preeclampsia, and my blood pressure was so high that they didn't want to let me leave for almost a week. And so while in the hospital, my son's father wanted to make sure that the baby was getting enough milk. And he could not be sure because he couldn't see the milk that was being given to the baby because I was nursing. And so we got into an argument in the hospital, and it got kind of loud, and the nurse heard the commotion, and she came in the hospital room and she said, "Hey, what's going on?" And so he's like, "Hey, I want to feed the baby. I want to feed the baby formula." They had provided little formula bottles in the cart for the baby. And I let the nurse know that I wanted to exclusively breastfeed. I didn't even use that terminology because I was not aware of that terminology at that point. I just knew that I'm only giving my baby breast milk. The nurse sided with me. I want to also add, I hid the breast milk. I hid the formula because I didn't want him to give the baby formula. And I knew that he would if he found the bottles. So I hid the formula in this little compartment in the cart. And the nurse not only had my back and stood up for me and said, "Hey, if mom only wants to give baby breast milk, then that's what we're going to do." And she kind of came in and helped to diffuse the situation, but also it helped to validate my feeling that I was doing the right thing. Because if this medical professional is saying, we support mom in breastfeeding the baby, and we're going to stand by her, even if someone else is trying to give formula, I felt like they know what they're talking about. So if she's saying that this is okay, then we're gonna be on the right path. So I always thank her because she was in that moment kind of this hero for me that I needed. She also mentioned a group called La Leche League, which is a breastfeeding peer support group that I'm a part of. And at the time, I didn't have the transportation to get to a meeting or the means at that time to try to figure that out. But I kind of held on to that name in my brain somewhere. And so it would come back up later, but she really set the precedent for me because I had nobody else there giving me any tidbits of information about breastfeeding. And it was really a blessing for me. I would say on the next slide, we'll talk about how and this is a funny picture that I use because it is actually an incident that happened I didn't have any physical issues with breastfeeding. We were off to a good start, and he actually co-slept with me, and breastfeeding as a single mom made it really, really easy for me, where I could get enough sleep through the night, because I didn't have anybody helping me get up in the middle of the night, it helped me to be able to soothe my baby. And it was kind of a lifesaver in a sense. We didn't have physical problems, but there were some incidents that happened. My son refused to take a bottle. And that was really scary because at the time I had gone back to school, and he would not drink out of a bottle all day long. And so his father was very nervous. I was very nervous. And I kind of came up with a solution. I found a sippy cup that had a silicone nipple on it, and that worked. And so it was like a breath of fresh air. But I didn't know that that was something that babies, or exclusively breastfed babies, did. And so it was a kind of scary time because you're always afraid, what if my baby isn't getting what they need? I figured that out. And then I also had to deal with the scrutiny from my family members. And I think a lot of people who choose to breastfeed can attest to having some sort of experience around people not being accepting of you breastfeeding, especially if it's publicly, whether you're covered or not. And in this photo here, I was out at lunch with my family members, and I had one very outspoken auntie who did not like that I breastfed publicly. And I would try to cover up, and he would snatch the cover off of him, and he would be sweating. So I felt so bad for my baby because he was hot. He did not like it. And so eventually I just had to go with what worked for him. And so I would breastfeed where we are, and I would try to be discreet, and my aunt did not like it. And so in this picture, she actually had told me to go to the restroom. Well, why don't you just go to the restroom and feed him there? And I remember thinking, this sounds absurd. Why would I take my baby in a nasty restroom to feed him where there's no seats, there's no area to nurse my baby, and we're about to sit down and eat and have dinner? Why can't my baby just eat? And it just seemed like the next best thing. And so she had a lot to say during my entire time nursing, and she absolutely grew from the experience that we had. By the time that I had subsequent kids, she didn't even bat an eye. And I remember asking her about it because she was so vocal about me breastfeeding publicly. And she wasn't fazed anymore. She was like, oh, it's just normal. And it made me kind of feel happy because it was a feeling of, I have normalized breastfeeding to someone who is not only close to me and dear to me, but this is a tough critic, and this is a tough person to get on your side. And so it really made me feel better that I had done the right thing, that my family supported me a little bit more at this time. And so I always tell people that breastfeeding for me has a special place in my life. It helped me through postpartum depression. It helped me through really to find my purpose in life, because I had many visions of what I thought I wanted to do. And every turnaround, I kind of got brought back to breastfeeding in some shape or fashion. And at this stage, when my son was probably maybe around 6 months old in this picture, I didn't even know that I could do anything related to breastfeeding. I didn't know that there were career options surrounding that. And so that was a really big part of my life. It was a really trying time in my life. And so getting through this, I really credit breastfeeding a lot for helping me. And then in the next slide, I talk about where I am now in my life, which is I have had 3 more babies, and I have successfully breastfed all 3 kids. And as you can see, we breastfeed everywhere. It is just a part of our lives. It is a part of our home. And my kids are not only educated on it, but to them, it is just a normal part of life. And some pictures that I couldn't find were my son trying to breastfeed his newborn baby sister because she was crying, and just seeing how it's affected them in such a positive way. And I look at, again, how my whole family is so supportive. And when I have had cousins who've had babies, they have turned to me for breastfeeding advice. They have turned to me when they needed extra milk. And so these were things that really made me so happy, because I know statistically that Black women are less likely to breastfeed, and they are less likely to extend breastfeeding. And so seeing it on a first a basis in my own family was really, really pleasing to me in my heart. It just was like, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. And so in the next slide, I talk about the purpose that I found with breastfeeding. And the purpose for me started with going to my first La Leche League meeting after I had moved and had my second child. And I'm now a stay-at-home mom, and I have the ability to go to a meeting. And I go to a meeting and I go to a conference, and I am surrounded by all of these women who are breastfeeding. And I have never been around so many people who breastfed. And I felt accepted, I felt invited, and it was such a pivotal time for me that I think showed me that there are different avenues I can go about helping people. And so I joined La Leche League, and then the pandemic happened right after I became a leader. And so I couldn't host any in-person meetings, but I did try to host some virtual meetings. And then I joined the board of directors, or the council, for La Leche League USA. And so I have started to work more on that end, on the back end of it. And that has led to me starting a nonprofit called Nourish and Thrive, which aims to create breastfeeding equity for Black women or Black birthing people. And it is something that is so fulfilling. And when I tell people about it, I actually get really excited about it, because this is something that I would love to be my legacy. I would love for people to remember me because of the work that I've done in helping my community. And again, I never thought that any of this was possible, but it all started with breastfeeding. It all started with this love for breastfeeding that came from I don't know where, but it has always been a part of my heart, and it's a part of my identity. And I am so grateful that I've been able to breastfeed, because I know that it isn't always something that is as feasible for some people, depending on their situations. And I know that it is something that may be accessible, even though it seems like the most accessible thing to do. So I am grateful, and I feel like my children and my breastfeeding journey is a part of my identity. It's a part of my story for myself as an individual.
Oh my goodness, Stephanie, thank you so much. That's a beautiful, incredible story. Thank you. Oh man. Wow. All right. Now we're going to transition to Amber, who's going to share her breastfeeding story with us.
After I stopped tearing up, because that was such a powerful story, Stephanie. And so much actually resonates. You were right in saying, I hope it's getting better. I hope it's not all birthing people who breastfeed, but especially if you have a child who basically needs to nurse anywhere, you're gonna get it, right? Whether it's from your family or your friends. So I really felt, and also being a minority in a different way. It's interesting, as a white cis woman, you would think, hey, we have the highest statistics, and yet if you look at lesbian couples, they're lower, right? So basically, if you get any group of people where you don't get the same amount of visibility, support, encouragement, or simply representation, right? All these things really matter. And so much like you, Stephanie, the journey of feeding a child has brought so much to my own lived experience of, it's gotten me on this advocacy road, and it's gotten me, I'm likewise became a leader during the pandemic, Low League leader. I work with Breastfeed Durham for the LGBTQ committee to make sure that our voices are heard in these conversations around accessibility, representation, and peer-to-peer support. So I'm going to try not to tear up with my journey, but I will say one of the driving factors for me to want to birth a child rather than adopt, because as I say, when you don't have the right parts in the house, you get a choice. So me and my wife, when we decided which path we wanted to become parents, I wanted the physical experience of being pregnant, birthing, and breastfeeding, even though I did not grow up with it and I didn't see myself as a teenager and young 20s. I'm not that old, I was born in 85, but being in the South in the 90s, you don't see gay people with kids, right? So I never really saw myself having children. I just didn't see that as a way. And so in my 30s, coming to that has all been really special. And so I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this kind of more straightforward parenting thing, I want the whole thing. I want the out of hospital birth. I want the breastfeeding. I'm a chronic over researcher. So I was going to the Leche League meetings in pregnancy. I already had the book that I was reading because I just had this concept that while it came naturally, it wasn't, while it was natural, it didn't come naturally. I remember reading very early on in pregnancy, animals in captivity, if they did not see the nursing relationship growing up, when they had their own children, they could not nurse their babies. I remember reading a story about an elephant like that. And so I realized, oh, wait, I've never seen this happen. I should probably invest. So, a few weeks to my due date, I was going to the Leche League meetings outside of DC. And you can go to the next slide. So I was working with some midwives, and I still really am an advocate for the way we birth is the way we nurse. And so I pushed really, really hard for an out of hospital vaginal birth. I did a cephalic version because she was breech all the way up to 38 weeks. So we were lucky enough that we got her turned upside down. She was almost 2 weeks late, which was the cutoff for the midwife. So it was just like to the wire, everything I was working towards. And I had this out of hospital birth at the birth center. It was great. As in, was my first labor, but it really was like the classes had taught me. It's like 18 hours. I didn't need any intervention. And then I had a retained placenta. And I always say this definitely has set the road for my relationship with my baby. So as you can see, the midwives were helping her latch because I was starting to hemorrhage because the placenta wasn't coming out. And so I was holding my just born baby, nursing while my placenta was manually removed. And so that was definitely a birth trauma. And yet it was a gift because I didn't have to have a hospital transfer. If that had happened in a hospital, I would have been rushed into surgery. It hurt like worse than anything. And yet my child was on my chest the entire time. There was never a break in that bond. And so while I definitely had some postpartum therapy around that traumatic event, in the end, I ended up being really grateful for the midwife that was there. She was the one who'd been doing this for 35 years. She said that had only happened one other time, and she has birthed hundreds of babies. And so it was just one of those things. And yet that happened and I was holding my newborn baby. So we are home, 6 hours after that. And my milk is in 24 hours, people. Like there was no, let's slow this. and rather severe oversupply. So then here comes months and months as others who work in lactation support. It did not come down at 8 weeks like the internet told me. It did not come down at 12 or 16 weeks like the LC told me. I was donating loads and loads of milk up until my kid was 2. So it definitely got better by about 8 or 9 months, but it was really me managing this, just this lots and lots of milk. And you know, a baby who's getting lots and lots of milk, there's all kinds of GI distress, there's all kinds of things. And I think my very high needs baby, I always thought it was because of the oversupply. And it was my first baby. And so I didn't have any comparison. I just knew, man, this is a lot of work. I remember especially the first weeks, like my wife like spoon feeding me beef stew in the middle of the night, because my baby would not, she wouldn't sleep. Spoiler alert, she still doesn't sleep. So this just sort of set me on this journey of, wow, this really is 24/7. And I would not have been able to make it through without La Leche League, without knowing that I had access to lactation counselors beyond La Leche League, because I really needed that very one-on-one support, and a wife who understood how important it was to me. And just kind of like what Stephanie was saying, just grit, right? I don't know where it came from. It was just something I wanted to keep going. And so me and my little kiddo, we figured it out and we kept nursing. So next slide, please. So then 3 months comes and I'm right in the thick of figuring out the oversupply. I've hit that 12 weeks where, you know, statistically my body is supposed to have caught on. I'm doing all of the things, the block feeding, everything. And I really get to a mental health crisis. I've developed this acute postpartum anxiety that after about 10 days of not sleeping, I end up in the ER. It was terrible. And this is outside DC. So I only say that because I would expect certain treatment in more rural areas. In a more urban space, I expect people to be more informed. And so I was in the ER because the midwives would help me as much as they could. I had gotten all these, you know, they were checking my thyroid. They were really trying to help, like, wow, this is really acute. This is from 0 to 100, you're not able to sleep. This is something that you need help with. And this experience has set me on a path of also being a mental health advocate for pregnant and nursing women. And yes, we need special support and special information, but the information's not that hard to find. And yet we still have doctors, ER staff, hospital staff that refuse to be educated on what and what is not safe for nursing peoples. And here I am with a mental health crisis, carrying my baby into the ER room during cold and flu season because we were that attached. There was no, you stay with this other parent for 4 hours while I'm in the back. That was not my lived experience as a parent. So I have my little 3-month-old. They have a suicide watch person in the room. We wait hours and hours, and essentially in the end, because I was just like, I can't sleep and I'm very, very anxious. I need help. They came back with, if you continue to breastfeed, we can give you no medicinal help. You have to stop weaning. You can check into the psych ward, but you cannot bring your baby, or you have to promise you're not going to nurse for us to help you at all. And it wasn't even that I came in with specific medication requests. It was just, I think there are things that can help me. I haven't slept in 10 days. Please help. And their answer was, stop breastfeeding or we give you no help. So I literally walked out of that hospital breastfeeding my baby. Like it was on the boob walking out, because that was not acceptable to me. And the midwives got me connected to someone in Virginia that specialized in helping us pregnant and nursing women. And it's been a journey, 4.5 years. I have a different psychiatrist now, and I'm so, so grateful for medical people who are committed to being up to date on research and helping us make informed choices that help us live better lives. Because I think it is unacceptable to tell a mother, you get zero help or you stop nursing. I learned a lot through that experience, because there's a lot more room in there than they say, right? There's always risks, but there's other things. Like I remember when I was very severe, it would be a certain medication only right after she nursed, when I knew she'd be asleep for 3 hours, right? There is some granularity here. And what I did not find acceptable was that that was not given to me because I was breastfeeding. And so I'm still very passionate about knowing your rights as a patient and not being shamed because you value breastfeeding and you may need medications, whether it's mental health or not. And too often we're given this message that anything you ingest in your body is bad for your baby. And so we're made to feel guilty or like we don't have options. And it's just not that simple. So luckily I came out of that, found help, really improved over the next year and continued nursing. What I found, and you can go to the next slide, is that I was not experiencing a typical parent-child relationship, but I did not realize that as having an only. More and more and more, I started to see that my kiddo was falling in a neurodivergent umbrella. And it was so helpful actually to start having things to Google and start having books to read, so I didn't feel like I was either not good enough or not able to handle certain things, or why was I the mom in the La Leche League that was always bringing up sleep? Can I not just deal with sleep deprivation? And then when I became a leader and started helping more mothers, and in the past 1.5 years started reading more about neurodivergence and all the different ways, right? Because my kiddo did not express in the stereotypical way. It gave me so much validation for how hard I'd been working, how good of a job I was doing, and no wonder I was having a hard time. And so as you can see in these pictures, my kid was my little barnacle baby. She went from being a high needs baby to a high needs toddler, would not sleep without being attached to the breast, would not tolerate being around a lot of other people without me. And then the pandemic hit in the winter of 2020, she had turned 3. That, love helped me during that time. That was probably my hardest parenting time. It harder than 3 months postpartum. I mean, not harder than going to the ER, that was terrible, but just hitting that 3rd birthday and seeing, wow, I'm still nursing to sleep. I'm still nursing all night long. She's still all on my body. Am I doing something wrong? Should she be different? Right? These just big parental things, and getting that judgment, like, oh, even for my crunchy mamas, right? But they all weaned around 2.5 or 3. So then I have a 3-year-old, and even my crunchy mamas are saying, well, when are you gonna wean? Like you still nurse at night. And it was very hard and very freeing once I started to get some medical help with her and getting a relationship with an OT and talking to other psychiatrists for her. And so while there was definitely some hard parts about a very high needs kid, the fact that I was able to keep nursing through all of that helped me survive the last 2.5 years of pandemic. And so on our last slide, She will be 5 in November. She will wean one day, not today. And I've really taken a lot of comfort in that, of just everybody weans. And I don't throw around the autism label often, but it is so helpful with certain medical professionals who don't respect me, certain friends and certain family members who are going to judge that she still needs nursing to co-regulate, and that she still needs nursing to sleep. And the fact that she only wakes up a few times a night is a big improvement, and she's almost 5. It has helped me see that breastfeeding has been the single most, interestingly, freeing tool that I have and continue to have in raising a very spirited neurodivergent kiddo. And so when she forgets to nurse to sleep 2 nights in a row, I may get excited, like this might be the beginning of her not needing to nurse. Then the next day she'll have 3 meltdowns, and nursing is what calms her down. And so I couldn't imagine parenting without breastfeeding. And I'm really honored that in small ways I can help other parents get that success, because it's not easy. And we are trying for a second. I would be the one to carry again. And so that will shake things up, right, for my kiddo and for me. But I'm not doing any preemptive weaning, and I'm just, I'm almost 38. Some people think that's old for getting pregnant. Some people think that's young. And so I'm just really being open about what this next stage will be for me. But when I think of parenting a second, I wouldn't do anything differently. The skin to skin, the co-sleeping, the breastfeeding. You just need more and more support. So that is probably my takeaway, is that I was only successful because of support and of advocating for myself. And I think as you have more and more children, it's not that you need less support, you actually need more. And it really is a community that we are raising these children in. And I'm so honored to share it with so many of us amazing people who want to share this information. So thank you for letting me share my story today.
Oh, Amber, thank you for sharing your story today. Oh my goodness. I feel the need to put on my provider hat. Maybe I guess I have both on. I have my mama hat and my provider hat on, but I want to say I believe you about sleep. I too have a neurodiverse child, and had Amber and I became friends during that 3-year-old dark time, and I felt just so deeply. But I think this is true no matter what our feeding stories, parenting stories are. You need providers to say, I believe you, because it feels everyone's saying no, like it can't be that bad. It can't be that hard. But it probably, yeah, I believe you. Oh,
Thank
goodness.
you. It is interesting. I'm not sure a provider has ever actually said, I believe you.
Oh, goodness. Whew. Okay, I gotta shake it off. Would anybody else? We have a few more things we'd love to share from Breastfeed Durham, and we have this space reserved. We actually reserved from 12 until 2 because we weren't really sure how this time would go and who would want to share. Would anyone else like to share anything? And it's okay if you don't have photos. Our presenters came with photos, but we don't all have to have photos today. Just want to open the floor if anyone else has something they'd like to share.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lakita Sanders, and I work for Durham County Department of Public Health. And I want to say to you, Stephanie and Amber, I truly appreciate you sharing your stories. I feel honored to get to sit and listen to them. I mean, they were beautiful, remarkable stories. And even with the adversities, they were just so beautiful, and just just hearing all the support that you had along the way truly, I'm sure, made a difference. So thank you for just sharing that. And the pictures were amazing. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to just share a few more thoughts from Breastfeed Durham. Did it work? It doesn't look like it doesn't. Can you all see my screen? Uh-oh. It doesn't. Can you see this screen with a picture of my little guys with yellow on? Yeah, okay. It doesn't look that way on my screen. But this is always my slide when I am the presenter and talk, where I always talk about how so many times when we have the opportunity to give talks, they ask for our financial disclosures. And I always feel like more than our financial disclosures, we feel like our lived experience shapes us so deeply. And I always just like to share that I am a passionate parent. I believe that watching over my kiddos like a lioness is my number one most important job. And I'm fearless on that. And that I have two children with special needs that so deeply shaped my journey. I have one son with profound unilateral sensory neural hearing loss, which means he had a lot of neurological movement and he didn't sleep. And then I have another child who's on the spectrum who I was used to not sleeping by then. And I volunteer with lots of groups. And I just think that impacts all of our journeys. And I always like to put up this slide. Our work at Breastfeed Durham, we think about all the ways that the community impacts our breastfeeding and our infant feeding journey. And at the center of our ecological model, we don't put, some people put a baby and some people put a mom. We put a family because we think that all those people who live in your house impact who you are. And even if the only two people who live in your house, well, is just one mama who has a baby growing in her belly, that if that baby is coming in, your plan is for this baby to join you and for the two of you to be a family, that you are a family. And if in your household there are 14 people living in your house with mama and grandma and aunties and cousins and a lot of people with all their opinions in your house, then that is who's at the center, no matter what it looks like. And we look at all the ways all of these things in our community impact the family journey. And we're really excited about next week, Thursday, starting to celebrate Black Breastfeeding Week and all the ways we've celebrated National Breastfeeding Month. And at Breastfeed Durham, we look at all these ways from our Black Breastfeeding Coalition to our LGBTQ plus Human Milk Feeding Coalition. And we invite you all to just join us and share your story. And so we talk about all the ways that our experience and intersectionality impact us, including my history from my breastfeeding family. And we look at like age and race and sex and neurodiversity and all the ways that our community impacts our story. And this is kind of more than just my breastfeeding story. These are the pictures of all the ways and who I am, because I thought you all would share. So I would share just a little bit about my family and my community. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to just stop sharing my screen because I want to just say maybe somebody else might want to share before we get off. I want to open the floor one more time before we end. Last chance. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we thank you all for listening and sharing stories with us today.
I am so curious to, so I am familiar with Joy. I've met Joy before virtually, and I love the nonprofit that she is the executive director for. And I have heard of Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, but I have never had anyone explain to me what they do and that sort of thing. So I would love to hear from them.
Hey y'all, I was thinking that so that logo that was there, unintentional, I had that there that is where I work, but I joined Breastfeed Durham as like a parent, as a breastfeeding mama who's struggling, and also just someone who loves to volunteer in the breastfeeding field. I used to be able to volunteer with the state coalition, and I feel like that's not my place right now, just not feeling connected there. So I've been really excited to just connect with Love and Bernadette and the team here. So I hope that that logo wasn't intimidating. I'm not listening from a job perspective. And I'm certainly not sharing anything that I have heard. So I'm so grateful to hear all of you. And gosh, what I was thinking of was this person that I know. She's in Virginia, but she's a perinatal therapist. So she's a massage therapist. That's actually how I met her, because I also used to be a massage therapist. And she does a lot of traumatic sort of processing work with people around their birth and their breastfeeding experience. And she's invited me to have a conversation with her, and I never have. And I'm like, all the things you all were sharing, just lots of triggering coming up. And I'm like, I could use a conversation about my birth experience and my breastfeeding experience, with someone who's trained to just listen. And I don't know what her techniques are, but she teaches online courses about that for professionals. So I know she's really, really good at that. So I can try to dig that up and share it if other folks are interested. But I guess your question was really about CGBI. So the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, it's local in Chapel Hill, and it's at the School of Public Health there at UNC. So that school has a department that's focused only on maternal, family, and child health. And inside that department, there's a little breastfeeding institute that's been there for probably 12 years, and was started by a low HLA person, actually, who is extremely wealthy, and basically started an endowment. So she gave a bunch of money to the school, and she said, I want you to use the interest off of this endowment to kind of create a breastfeeding facility. So we were actually the first public health center that had an infant feeding center. And that was actually the name in the beginning. It was called the Infant and Young Child Feeding Center. And then the director that they brought in to run it, Miriam Labach, she was from UNICEF, or had been working for UNICEF. She changed the name after a little while, and now we're like, we might want to be changing our name again back to something less breastfeeding centric, just because that word can sometimes not feel inclusive to everyone. So we'll see. But that's what it is. And the director at the time, she was just a global sort of fierce advocate for breastfeeding for many, many decades. She passed away in 2016, right after she retired. And so we tried to just continue the work. It's mostly maternity care support. So basically working on making sure all parents get access to skin care right after delivery, rooming in 24/7 in the facility, feeding on cue. So the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding, those things that kind of facilitate breastfeeding in the postpartum period. So working really top down, I used to be a doula, and I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, this is too big for me. I didn't have my big girl voice yet. I was young 20s, and it was so disempowering to see what providers would do to clients. And I felt like I need to step away from this, because I don't have the skills to advocate for these women like I need to. And so now I feel like I'm kind of doing doula work, but from a different angle, from the systems level, policy level down. But anyway, that is that institute. So we are small, maybe 10 or 12 people, and 2 faculty. I'm a staff member. And they have a lactation consultant training program at that at the school as well. So people can come and learn how to be a lactation consultant. Yeah. So any questions you have, I'm happy to give you my email or contact.
Thank you, Kathy. I
Sure.
actually, I wanted to, Joy, do you want to take a turn and share about equity before birth?
Hey y'all, my name is Joy Spencer. I had some prior obligations, so I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it, but I was able to end early, so I snuck in here late. So apologies for being late, but I wanted to share my support, and so I caught the tail end of the stories that are being shared, and I appreciate y'all for sharing your stories. Hey Logan, I am primarily a parent of a now 4-year-old who breastfed until she was 3 years old. We start preschool next week. Oh, MG. We have open house tomorrow. And that is what is occupying all of my brain space for the most part right now. And it's just because I'm just overcomplicating the situation. And I do currently lead Equity Before Birth, which we are a Black maternal health charity organization, and we're helping to eliminate financial barriers that folks may experience when seeking pregnancy-related resources. And we center Black and Brown families because we have a goal to tackle some of the disparities that we see in our area and in our country. And what that looks like in terms of breastfeeding support is that we cover the cost for breastfeeding classes, whether it's a one-on-one class or a support class, if families would benefit from that information. And we also cover the cost for families to speak with breastfeeding educators or lactation consultants to troubleshoot and try to navigate or maybe resolve some challenges that they may be experiencing throughout their breastfeeding journey. And we do that by partnering with folks in the community who are already doing that work and familiar with working with families. And we just pay those providers market rate in order to get those services to families. And so we're a pretty new organization, less than 2 years old. We experience very high demand very quickly. So we are in full transparency, like pacing ourselves now and like slowing it down to make sure we're very intentional about the services that we provide and trying to do it in a way that's sustainable because we're funded just by donations. So if we don't get any donations in, then we're not able to help as many families as we like. So anyway, just working alongside the community to get resources into the hands of families, especially if breastfeeding is the goal. We want to connect them with an educator or consultant that can help them reach whatever that goal may be. So happy to like be able to peep in on this space. I am a huge advocate for breastfeeding. Probably wouldn't have stopped with my kid if it weren't for the stigma in my community, which I'm ashamed to say, but it was just hard to keep fighting and justifying with people that just thought it was whatever they thought. It was exhausting to me, so I just chose my battles and unfortunately weaned her before I feel like she would have chosen to. But it wasn't traumatic, but it was bittersweet. And I appreciate what y'all are doing to support families because it's important. I think one of the biggest like barriers to not meeting your breastfeeding goal is like lack of support. And sometimes you just need somebody else to let you know that like it's not all peaches and cream. It is hard, but like you just kind of need that extra push of support to like get you to reach your goal.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking at Kern. Would you like to introduce yourself? We're at 1 o'clock. I'm thinking some of you may need to go.
Hi, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I was having audio issues earlier, but I'm Kern Eason. I'm a clinical practice consultant with United Healthcare, and I cover Medicaid Region 4 and half of Medicaid Region 1. And my background is in pediatrics mostly. I worked with Community Care of North Carolina, but I'm learning a ton about maternal side of my role. And I've been with United now for 2.5 years. So thank you for letting me participate, love, and just learn more about breastfeeding. We had a breastfeeding champion on our team that ended up, her husband took a surgical role in Texas, and so she had to leave. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can about breastfeeding and really support our high-risk mothers and children that are maybe born with health complexities, and the care managers to support them. And breastfeeding is something that we believe in and that they strongly believe in. And so the more I can learn and the more I can support activities and connect them with resources is kind of why I'm here. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Kern. And I encourage everyone, if you all look around, you'll see Kern in all of these different advocacy spaces. His name pops up all over the place. So thank you very much for joining us today. Lakita, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Lakita Sanders, and I work for Durham County Department of Public Health as a public health educator. I work up under the communicable disease and maternal and child health team. So my areas of focus are childhood lead poisoning prevention, adolescent pregnancy prevention, and early childbirth. So I'm trying to, I offer childbirth education classes. I talk some about breastfeeding, but I still have a lot to learn. And so I'm just happy to be here to hear all of your stories. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Lakita. And Lakita too is another one of she's like quiet. She's just quiet all over the community, sharing good information. She's always popping up.
Yeah, so I don't get to, thanks for allowing me to attend. I don't get too many community members. So everyone up here, except for 2 people, are new to me. But I am happy to be here, and any bit of support that I can provide to my expectant families, I'm all for it. I was telling Love earlier that I lead a lot of people to the Breastfeed Durham website, and that I find it very comprehensive, and my families have benefited from a lot of the support groups, and she's been so helpful to me as well. So thanks to all of you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Bernadette, do you want to close us out? Any final words?
I just thank y'all for sharing your stories. I'm a mom of 5, and I've breastfed every last 5 of my children. I have two of my children that I breastfed. They're grown, and trying to get them to breastfeed, their kids, or was trying to get the girlfriends to breastfeed. I had one that worked. The other 2 was like, no, we're not doing that. I do, understand where Stephanie's coming from with having an aunt, having an aunt thinking that, you need to go in the bathroom to do that. I didn't have that issue. I was ashamed. For me, I was ashamed to breastfeed my baby in front of my family, because it was like she said, we didn't really do that. They didn't really do that. And so when I had my aunt pull it out, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. She pulled it out and put it in the baby mouth. Okay, like this was something new, and here I am about 30-something years old, and I'm like, wow, she pulling my breast out to put it in the baby mouth and telling me to shut up and feed the baby. So that was my family experience. I was like, in front of everybody. So they was like, just take the breast out, put it in the baby mouth, and feed the baby because he's hungry. And I'm like, but in front of everybody. So that was like my story of saying, okay, I'm comfortable now. I can start being a little bit more comfortable and understanding that this is really what's up. Breastfeeding is really it. And when you're thinking you're ashamed, don't be ashamed, because everybody else may be up to it. I didn't even think my aunts was breastfeeding, but they was like, yeah, they did the breastfeeding, and they did it in front of the men, so it was like, did I really want the men to look at my breast? But it was like, hey, do it. It's good for the baby. So that helped me come out of my shell, because I breastfed ever since I was 16 years old. My first child was when I was 16. So I thought I was really ashamed of breastfeeding in front of people, because I was like, people gonna look at me and like, put the breast in, don't feed that baby like that, cover up. Like Amber said, my baby gonna be hot. I mean, Stephanie, my baby gonna be hot up under there. So when she pulled my breast out in front of everybody and put my breast in the baby's mouth, I was just like, whoa, okay, this is something new. So but I had breastfed my babies until they were 2-year-old. If I could have breastfed them more, I probably would have, because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the bond that I did have with them. I did have the father to be like, yeah, let's breastfeed, because he didn't want the formula at all. He couldn't stand formula, so he was like, my baby is not drinking formula. And so I did have that type of support. But breastfeeding to me is awesome. And so that's why I'm where I'm at now. And so that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you, Bernadette. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to call it to an end. Like I said, we saved 2 hours just because we wanted to make sure we gave time for everyone's voice to be heard. And I feel like we've heard everyone's voice today. So thank you all so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.